muito boa noite. Sou Juliana Souza, gerente de expansão da Wadem Prime Brasil. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos a este webinar organizado pela Wadem Prime, filial Brasil. A Escola Internacional de Negócios, com 28 sedes nos Estados Unidos, presentes em 11 países de língua espanhola na América Latina e agora também no Brasil. É uma verdadeira honra contar com a presença de vocês hoje aqui. Sabemos que o tempo de cada um é valioso e agradecemos profundamente por terem escolhido investir esse tempo, este momento, para continuar se desenvolvendo conosco. Quem somos? Quem é a Wadem Prime? É uma escola de negócios com visão global que oferece programas nas áreas de negócios, idiomas, tecnologia e formação profissional com diploma americano. Contamos com o respaldo acadêmico da Wadem Universidade e com o aval institucional da Câmara de Empresários Hispânicos, nos Estados Unidos, o que garante a qualidade e a projeção internacional de todos os nossos programas. Sobre a nossa aula, ou seja, sobre esse momento aqui no Zoom, eu preciso dar algumas orientações. Então, antes de começarmos, algumas orientações técnicas e de etiqueta para garantir a experiência positiva para todos. Por favor, mantenham seus microfones desligados durante a apresentação, para evitarmos interferências. Caso queiram fazer perguntas, podem escrevê-las no chat a qualquer momento. Ao final da conferência, também teremos um espaço de 10 minutos dedicados exclusivamente para perguntas e respostas ao vivo. Os materiais do curso também serão enviados, poderão ser enviados para vocês num prazo de 72 horas em PDF pelo e-mail cadastrado. A única contribuição que nós pedimos em troca é simples, mas muito importante para nós. É que nos envie um breve comentário, um breve depoimento ou avaliação sobre a sua experiência no curso e sobre o conteúdo recebido. Isso nos ajuda a melhorar continuamente e a seguir oferecendo a formação acessível e de qualidade para todas as pessoas. Muito obrigada e vamos começar. Mais uma vez, agradeço a todos por estarem conosco. Pedimos que se preparem para fazer todas as anotações, participar e aproveitar o evento ao máximo. E agora, sem mais demora, passamos a palavra para o professor Agustin. Seja muito bem-vindo. Damos as nossas mais boas-vindas calorosas a você nesse momento. A palavra é sua.
Okay, guys, good evening, everyone. My name is Augustin, and I'm going to be in charge of this webinar that it's called Using Connectors and Personal Opinions in Working Context. So throughout this webinar, we're going to learn a lot of expressions to use when you're talking, not only when you're talking, but also when you're writing. And you're going to be talking like a pro. That is the name of this webinar. So first of all, my name is Augustin. I am 31 years old, and currently I'm living in Brazil, in the northeast of Brazil. And I have been teaching English for more than 6 years so far, so I'm very familiar with these type of activities. So if you buy this webinar, you're going to be talking like a pro, and you're going to learn a lot of expressions that you can use not only in working situations, but also in casual situations. For example, when you're talking with friends or people that you know, as well as job interviews and working contexts. So guys, if you want to participate, if you want to talk, if you want to speak up, you can do it. I'm not going to force anybody to speak, but I would like you in some cases that you can use the chat for writing, okay? Just in case, I'm not going to force you, as I mentioned before, to talk, but if you want to participate, it's something that you can do. Or if you want to mention something, if you want to introduce yourself, whatever you want to do, you're up to. So guys, we're ready to start with this activity. So the first activity we're going to start with, it's called connectors. And this is effective connectors for professional communication. So first of all, we need to understand what is a connector or the purpose of using connectors in these contexts that I mentioned before, working and casual contexts. Then you're going to notice, when I ask you some questions, you're going to notice how organized you sound when you're able to use these type of expressions, okay? But first of all, we need to understand the purpose of these activity, okay? So first of all, using connectors, like, as I mentioned before, first of all, or in addition to this, also, and finally, helps organize ideas and make your workplace clear and professional. This is the most important thing about using connectors, right? So what is the purpose? That if I use these connectors, that then I'm going to give you some examples in English, in Spanish, and in Portuguese, just in case. By using these connectors, you're going to be able to sound more organized, okay? That is the purpose of using connectors. And we have some key connectors. Today, I'm going to show you 4 connectors, 4 common connectors that we normally use in real situations. And actually, these connectors are the ones that I normally use when I'm having a job interview or when I'm talking with friends or when I'm having a meeting in a professional context, okay? So for that reason, I have chosen these 4 connectors that, in my opinion, are really essential, okay? But the most important thing here is the organization and the position of these connectors when you're talking or when you're writing as well, okay? If you have any doubts or any questions you would like to ask, go ahead and you can do it, okay? So the first connector that we normally use when we want to improve our speech, it's first of all. So we normally use first of all at the beginning of our idea or sentence, and is used to introduce your main point or start your explanation. So we normally use first of all at the beginning of our statement, right? At the beginning of our idea. After this, we have another connector that it's in addition to this, or just in addition. So just wait a second because I have here. Okay. So as I mentioned before, the second connector, it's in addition to this. And this connector, or in addition, helps you add more information to what you said before, or in most of the cases, you can come up with another idea, a totally different idea. So you have to use this for this connector, in addition to this. You can add more information to the previous idea that you mentioned before, or you can come up with one totally different idea, like a totally different thing, right? Then we're going to see some examples, as I mentioned before. Then we have the connector number 3, that it's also. And also, it's another way to add extra details in a simple way. So if we compare number 3 and number 2, they have the same value or the same purpose in our speech or in our piece of writing. So we can change the position. If I want to use, in addition to this in number 2, and in number 3, I would like to use if I want to use in number 2 also, I can do it because, as I mentioned before, in addition to this and also have the same value and they have the same meaning, let's say, or an equivalence, similar equivalence. So the position, it's not important. I can use also first, and then I can use in addition to this, and the other way around, and that would be just fine, okay? And last but not least, that actually it's another connector that it's not included here, we have finally. And finally is used to finish your ideas or give the last point. And in my opinion, finally, it's one of the most important connectors because when you use finally, when you're talking or when you're writing, the other person or the audience that it's listening to you will understand that you're about to close your speech. And if you don't mention finally, well, people can get lost and you can get lost if you don't use finally. So it's something that helps ourselves and help the other people to understand that you're closing or about to close. So we can go over this activity again, the key connectors under functions. Just remember, first of all, it's the first connector that we normally use at the beginning, and it's used to introduce a main point or start your explanation. In addition to this, helps you add more information to what you said before, or you can come up with a totally different idea, right? Then we have number 3, that it's also, which is very similar to in addition to this, and it's another way to add extra details in a more simple way. And last but not least, we have finally, that it's used to finish your ideas or give the last point. These are the connectors we're going to be working with today. And as I mentioned before, at the end of this activity, you're going to be talking like a pro or like a more advanced student, okay? Now we have multilingual examples focus on first of all, and in addition to this. Then we're going to move on to the other two ones. So here, as I mentioned before, we're going to focus on isolated examples. Then we're going to join all of the examples and we're going to see what do we have, right? So here, as I mentioned before, we have 3 examples in 3 different languages. We have in English using first of all, that it would be something like this. First of all, we need to review the project's timeline. If you can see the connector or the equivalence in Spanish, it means primero que todo. As in Portuguese, it's antes de todo, right? They're very similar, but I would like you to notice or pay attention that we have the same equivalents, maybe different translations, but we use the same pattern when we're talking in our language, okay? So, but the most important example here is in English. First of all, and we have a context here that it would be a working context. Imagine a manager is saying, giving some directions about activities to be concluded. So first of all, we need to review the project, for example, right? Then if the manager or you want to add another idea or something similar, we have in addition to this. So for example, in addition to this, we should analyze the budget. And in Spanish, we have our equivalents that it would be además or además de esto. And in Portuguese, it would be além disso, right? So we have the same equivalents in our mother language, as I mentioned before, right? So then we have also, and the example in English, it would be, well, also the client requested an update by week's end. In Spanish, we have the equivalence here that it would be además, and in Portuguese, it would be the same as the previous one, além disso, right? So finally, it's the last connector that comes at the end of our speech. And we have, finally, we need to prepare the board presentation. In Spanish, it would be finalmente, and in Portuguese, it would be the same as in Spanish, finalmente, as well, right? So then, of course, these are some isolated examples or ideas, but you can imagine this, that your manager or another person is giving directions to you or you're giving directions to another person, right? So here we have the entire activity, the entire sample paragraph using connectors, right? So it would be something like this. If we connect all the ideas using connectors, then we're going to read this example without the connectors for you to see the difference. What would it be the problem if I don't use connectors? If I don't come up with connectors, you're going to notice what would happen. But we would have something like, well, first of all, we need to finish the report by Friday. In addition to this, we must check all the data to make sure that there are no mistakes. Also, we should inform the team about the changes in the project. And finally, after everything is done, we will send the report to the manager. So this example demonstrates how connectors create a logical flow between ideas, making communication more effective and more professional, okay? That is the point of these connectors, to sound more effective and more professional as well. But here we have a problem. For example, imagine that you forget about the connectors. That actually it's something very common that happens because sometimes we are in a difficult situation or challenging, we're nervous and we don't know what to say and we need to focus on the ideas. That is something very common that happens. Just remember that if you don't use connectors, nothing wrong would happen, right? But the problem is that you won't sound like organized. Imagine we can focus on the same sample paragraph. I'm going to read this without the connectors for you to perceive what would be the difference. For example, we need to finish the report by Friday. We must check the data to make sure that there are no mistakes. We should inform the team about the changes in the project, and after everything is done, we will send the report to the manager. I mean, there are a lot of information. There is a lot of information, right? Of course, that I'm reading a little bit faster, but imagine a real situation in which you're telling another person something to be done, or another person, or you are told by another person a lot of things to be done, right? It's more complicated to understand the flow, or it's more complicated to retain the information. That would be the problem. So when we use connectors, we can organize ourselves. Not only the other person would understand what you're saying, but also you will be able to organize yourself at your pace, okay? So you can make some pauses, you can, then you can continue reading, or you can continue talking, so you can organize more your speech, right? So you can make some pauses, for example. First of all, we need to finish the report. In addition to this, we must check all the data. Also, we should inform the team about the changes. And finally, we will send the report. It's more organized, and it would depend on the speed or how faster the other person talks, right? But it's not about that, because when we use connectors, in fact, we sound more organized. So as I mentioned before, to conclude, we're going to be focusing on these connectors. Just remember, first of all, in addition to this, also, and finally, we have more connectors, but we need to master these ones first, and then we can level up ourselves. Here, I'm going to ask you some questions. If you would like to answer, I'm going to ask you if you would like to answer, but you don't have to if you don't feel comfortable, or if you don't want to participate, it's just fine, okay? But if you want to speak up, you can practice using the connectors, because the more you practice, the better. So here we have a speaking practice, focus on work and technology topics. Just wait a second, because I would like to see who is connected. I have some people here. Well, Patricia, Natalia, Lucas, Helen, and Carolina. Okay, guys, as I mentioned before, if you want to participate, if you want to say something, I'm going to give you the opportunity to participate, and that would be just awesome. But here we have two situations. We have working questions, and then we have technology questions. I'm just going to read the examples, the questions here. So we have questions for you to see when. How do you know when I have to use connectors? Well, when you can follow a pattern, or when you can follow like different steps, or organizing different activities, there it's where connectors can be used. So we have questions such as, what do you do at your work, at your job? Or can you explain your tasks? Talking about the activities, or referring to the activities that you are in charge of, right? Or what do you like most about your job? If you have one thing, well, you don't have to use connectors. But imagine if you have more than one thing, like 2, 3, 4, or 5 things that you like about your job, the best option is using connectors for each idea. If you feel that you don't have a lot of vocabulary, it doesn't matter, because you can use simple ideas. Of course, that the more ideas, the more details that you give, the more complete it would sound your speech, and the more organized it would be at the end, right? Eventually, you will sound more organized. But it's up to you. It doesn't matter. This is not about the level of English, because if you have a low level of English, you can use connectors with more simple ideas. And if you have an advanced level of English, you can use it. Actually, it would be better, right? And you can organize yourself more. So here we have another question, like, first of all, how do you start your workday? Or do you work in a team, with a team? How do you communicate if you work in a team? Or how do you feel about working from home? So all the questions are designed for using connectors. But remember, as I mentioned before, it's up to you. If you have only one idea, or you don't want to develop your answer more, you don't have to use it. But if you want to challenge yourself and sound more advanced, well, using connectors, from my perspective, it would be the best choice. Okay, so we can practice with one question here that you can write in the chat. I wasn't looking at the chat. I'm going to send you one question that you can answer using the connectors. I'm going to choose what do you do at your job? I'm going to type this on the chat. What do you do at your job? This is a question I would like you to answer. If you want to speak, you tell me, or if you don't want to speak, you can just write using the chat. So this is a question I would like you to answer by talking or by writing, doesn't matter. What do you do at your job? Just remember, using the connectors will help you to organize yourself and organize the structure of your ideas. For example, if someone asks me, or if you ask me, okay, teacher, what do you do at your job? Well, first of all, in my job, I have to organize all the classes and I have to create all the content. In addition to this, sometimes I have to prepare students who wants to take international exams. So I need to create all the material for practicing and focusing on use of English and reading section from the exam. And finally, I am in charge of talking in English and trying to guide a student throughout the activity. So for example, here in my answer, I use only 3 connectors because it's my choice. I choose how many ideas I would like to use. If I want to continue talking or if I want to add more ideas, well, probably I'm going to use one more, or I can repeat another connector that I have used before, right? But it's up to you, you choose. It depends on you. I used only 3 connectors because it's what I wanted to do now, right? So it's your choice. You are in charge of the activity. Don't let the activity manages you. You manage the activity. That is what you need to take into account, that you manage the activity, not the activity manages you. So is there someone who would like to answer by talking this question, like explaining what do you do at your job? What about you, Lucas?
Hello, good night.
Hello, how is it going?
Oh, good. So, I would say first of all that my job is data analyst, and in addition to that, what I do is working with softwares to to teach some AI, machine learning to understand few questions or few activities. And in addition to that, I work with a team. So it's not by myself, it's a team to we can work together to do some results in every month. So yeah, finally, I love it to work with this, and yeah, it's a good job for me.
Excellent, perfect. It was amazing. I would like you guys to focus on the chat because I was paying attention to some ideas that Lucas was able to mention. Just one idea, some ideas that you can take into account, because this is a point. I would like you to see this. For example, he mentioned, well, he started with first of all, then he was talking about that he's a data analyst. Then he mentioned, in addition to that, or in addition to this, it doesn't matter. Well, he was talking about that he works with software. And then he mentions again, in addition to that, for that reason, I put it like twice, that it was repeated. And finally, he closed it by saying, well, he loves working with this area or in this field. It was excellent. So you can ask yourself a question like, is there a problem if I repeat another connector? No, at all. Actually, it's better to repeat another connector instead of not using anything. If you don't use anything, that is a problem. If you use another connector or if you repeat another connector, it doesn't matter, because that is a point, to sound natural, okay? So here he used, first of all, in addition to that again, and finally, but it doesn't matter because it was organized. That is the point of this. Is there another student that would like to answer this question by talking, as Luca did before? If not, don't worry. I'm not going to force anyone to talk. So we can move on to the other column that it's about technology. I have chosen different topics for you to see that we can, it doesn't matter the topic, it's about the way you answer the question. It doesn't matter if it's not advanced or if it's more advanced, it doesn't matter, because that it's about your ideas, your creativity about the questions. But the thing is the organization, that it's the focus, in my opinion. So in the technology column, in the technology section, we have some questions, as you can see. For example, what is your favorite piece of technology? Why? Well, you have to justify. So when you have a why, when you have two questions in one, normally when we're given why, well, there, it's an indicator that you can realize that you have to use connectors. How do you know? Because you have to defend your ideas. For example, what is your favorite piece of technology? That is one question. Yeah. Okay. Okay. As I was mentioning, you have two questions, right? Like, what is your favorite piece of technology? That is one. And the other one, it's why. That it's a little bit shorter, of course. But you answered the first question. Imagine that you are in a job interview, working with technology or something about technology. And the interviewer asks you, what is your favorite piece of technology and why? I would like to, it's more focused on why, okay? And there, it's where you have to use connectors. So for example, if you ask me, what is your favorite piece of technology? Well, my favorite piece of technology is my computer. Why? Well, first, if I'm not sure about my answer, I need to use simple ideas, because if you use complicated ideas, you're going to get lost, okay? And that is something that we're trying to avoid, right? Imagine in a job interview. So my favorite piece of technology is my computer, because, well, first of all, I use my computer every single day for working. And in addition to this, I communicate with my friends, and sometimes I send emails. And finally, I use my computer for video conferencing. And I stop. I can add something more if I want to continue a little bit. For closing, I can add one more idea. But once you said finally, it means, or I understand, and the other person understands, that you're going to stop talking, right? That is the point. And we can move on to the following question. So we have another question here, like, in addition to this, how do you use technology at work? Or do you think technology makes life easier? Why? How often do you see your phone or computer daily? Or one more question, that is, what technology will be most important in the future? So of course that the questions could be difficult or could be more simple as the first one, but it depends on you. Just be careful, because if you don't know a lot of, if you don't have a lot of insights, or if you don't have a lot of information or vocabulary or these type of situations, be careful with the amount of connectors and ideas that you're going to be using. If you don't know about the question, you're not sure, you don't have to use a lot of connectors. Probably you're not going to mention anything, or you're going to use maybe 2 or 3, right? So I have one more question. Remember, if you want to write on the chat, you can do it. Feel free to do it. But I would like to ask this question, the first one: what is your piece of technology and why? So is there someone who wants to answer this question? Sorry, what is your piece of technology and why? What about you, Lucas?
Oh, hello. My favorite piece of technology would be
Mm-hmm.
um, some
Maybe your
kind
cell
of
phone.
there is no now in market, but it would be like a meta. No, it's not a cell phone. It would be like a meta glasses, like the AI glasses that we can see maps, we can listen to music. So this is no common technology now. It still be in process to be placed in market, but this is my favorite piece of technology because I can
First of
do a
all,
lot of things, and it's not in my hand, it's in my face, like it's a glasses that can make me see a map, a direction, or in addition, it's more than one tool. So finally, I think this technology would be my favorite.
Okay, excellent. It was the signal was interrupted, but I got something. The problem, I mean, there was not a problem, but for example, he forgot to use connectors at the beginning, but then he mentioned in addition to this. But in my opinion, or what could have been the problem here, that the idea he wanted to explain or develop, it was very complicated. He was not, or I feel that he was not sure how to explain this technology, right? So that is another problem. It could be a problem if you want to explain something, but you don't know how to say or how to explain that. You have to use simple ideas. And of course, that can affect your the use of connectors because you're more focused on developing or coming up with that idea in order to explain that situation, and you forget about the use of the connectors. That is one of the problems, but don't worry because we have all of these situations for practicing. And remember, the more you practice, the more natural you're going to be using the connectors. Okay, guys, we have more questions for you to see. That it could be about a casual situation, for example, hobbies and hobbies. Okay, that it's a very common topic that we're asked. It's informal, but we're asked these questions in a job interview. For example, in a casual job interview, like what about your free time activities or spare time activities or hobbies? We have many expressions for that situation, but we have some sample questions. For example, what is your favorite hobby, or how long have you been doing this? Do you have any hobbies that help you relax after work? Well, if you have four, for example, activities, hobbies that you like doing after working, well, first of all, I like doing this. And in addition to that, another hobby that I like, it's whatever. And finally, whatever. If I don't have three, well, maybe I have two, or maybe I don't have anything. But if you have, the important thing is that you have to organize yourself. You're going to sound more interesting and natural as well. Or we have another one that it's, how do you find time for your hobbies during the week? That it's a little bit more difficult to answer, right? Do you like to do your hobbies alone or with friends? That is another question. And do you have any hobbies you want to try in the future? Well, if you have, I don't know, 3 hobbies or 3 new activities that you would like to do in the future, you can use connectors. Well, in the future, first of all, I want to learn how to play the piano. In addition to, because I feel that it's amazing, right? I can add more details. If I feel that it's very short, and if you can add more details. Because if you don't use a lot of information, maybe it's going to sound very short, but you choose if you want to do it. The important thing here is using connectors for organizing your thoughts. But for example, it's not the same if you say, first of all, in the future, I would like to learn how to play the piano. Well, that is one idea. Or if I want to make it more complex, well, in the future, I would like to learn how to play the piano because I feel that it's a very interesting hobby, and it's something that I really wanted to do. I have been looking for this for a long time. So for that reason, I would like to learn how to play the piano in the future. Of course, that it's longer and I'm using a lot of details, but you choose. It depends on your level. And we have a writing activity, 5 minutes writing activity that you can write on the chat. The writing activity, it's about a situation, just for practicing the use of connectors. And it says, write about a typical day at work and how you use technology to help with your task. So it's about a typical day at work and how you use technology for these activities, okay? So in this activity, for example, in the writing activity, you can apply everything, all the connectors, all the tips that we have been talking about before, right? So, and the writing activity, it's very important if you want to practice, because you can combine with the speaking section, okay? Sometimes the writing activity, it's very useful because you have more time to organize your ideas. In a speaking activity, for example, in an interview, you don't have a lot of time to organize yourself. So for that reason, it's more complicated, the speaking, 100% more complicated. The writing activity, it's difficult because if you don't know about the structure, or if you don't take the spelling into account, well, that could be a problem, right? The structure, the syntax, word order as well. You can have, it could be counted as a problem. So it's not as simple as it's not as difficult as speaking, but it's important to write properly, right? But you have more time. So imagine in one question, you have to automatically come up with your answer. But in the writing activity, possibly here, for example, we have 5 minutes writing activity. So you have 5 minutes to write this activity, and you have more time to organize and trying to come up with the connectors. So guys, this is the activity about the use of connectors. And we have one more activity in this webinar that we're going to combine with this activity. Just wait a sec, because I'm going to stop sharing this, the webinar that we're going to combine to the previous activity about the use of connectors. It's not the same activity, but it's the other part of speaking like a pro. So for that reason, it's really important, not only this one, but the other one, but also the other one. So then at the end of this activity, we're going to combine these expressions when we're debating or discussing about a topic, and we're going to organize the point of views or the ideas by using connectors and using your opinion about a topic. So this is for an academic, this is an academic activity, but it's not only an academic activity, but also for a working context. So we're going to follow this guide effectively for effective communication, and we're going to express our point of views during different situations, such as exams, speaking tests, or job interviews as well, or casual situations. So first of all, as we said before, we need to understand some of these expressions. We have some standard phrases and we have additional expressions. In this activity, we're going to focus on expressing ourselves and organizing ourselves, but focus on our opinion about a topic. And we're going to see two different situations. When you have an opinion about something, or when you don't have an opinion about something. We have these two situations, very common situations that we have to deal with in a job interview or in a casual context as well. So here we have some key opinion expressions. We have some standard or common phrases, such as, in my opinion, it's better to, or personally, I think that, I believe that. We have additional expressions, such as, I feel that, I would say that, in my view, I think, or frankly speaking, I think. And another important point about these activities is that you can combine sometimes these opinion expressions, okay? So for example, if I want to make a combination, I can say, well, in my opinion, I would say that. So I'm using a standard phrase with an additional expression. Or in my view, I believe that. I'm using an additional expression with a standard phrase. So it doesn't matter about the name, standard or additional. The important point is that you have to combine, or in some cases, if you want, you can combine some of these phrases and you're going to sound more polite and more advanced as well. Just remember, of course, that it's very difficult to remember or stick with these expressions at the beginning, but there are going to be some expressions that you're going to choose and you won't forget anymore. For example, in my opinion, it's the most important expression that we normally use. That it's important thing, at least try to choose one of these expressions and practice using these expression when you have to answer a question. But these are the expressions for expressing your opinion. When you have something to say, you can use these expressions. Then we have another situation that, in my opinion, it's the most important situation because it's the most problematic situation when we have to answer a question about an opinion, that it's when you're not sure. Or when you're not sure how to start, you're not sure about the topic because you don't want to answer the question because you're not familiar, you don't know about the topic, or you never thought about this situation. It's a new question or an unexpected question that you didn't imagine that you were going to be asked. So we have this situation. This is it. I mean, this is a real situation that we have to face and we have to deal with. So it's important to know some things that we can do when we have to face or when we have to go through this. So we have, when you're not sure, this is a situation when I don't know what to say, when I'm not sure about this question, then we're going to practice. So we have expressing a lack of opinion, that the meaning of a lack of opinion is when you don't know what to say, you don't have anything to say, or you're not sure. So instead of keep silent or don't say anything, like or hesitate, be nervous about the question, you can use expressions at the beginning. Like, I am afraid, I have never been interested in. It's a little bit longer. I'm going to tell you what it's one or the ones that I normally use when I want to express my lack of opinion. But these are some examples. I am afraid I never been interested in whatever. Imagine we're talking about, I don't know, traveling or data analyst or data analysis or coding or business. If I ask you a question about business or a question about, I don't know, machine learning, we have a lot of situations that maybe we don't know because we don't have any information about that, right? We can use this. Well, I'm afraid I've never been interested in, or I'm afraid I am not very keen on. Just understand the expressions for like the entire expression. You don't have to translate the expression. Just try to understand that when you're not sure, you can use the first one. You can use the second. I'm afraid I'm not very keen on. I'm not keen on technology. I'm not very keen on traveling. I'm not very keen on business, whatever. The topic, it's an imaginary situation that then we're going to choose some different topics. And finally, we have one more that it's, I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar with this topic. That is one that I normally use. Of course, that it depends on the person, but I'm more familiar with this expression because in my opinion, it sounds very, very practical. And it helps you not only when you're not sure about the topic, but also to organize, to give time to yourself. Like we have now, buying time. So just use as a strategy. For example, we have, I haven't really thought about that. And then you have to mention something, try to mention something. And, or I'm not really familiar with that topic, but I would say, for example, it's very similar to, I'm not familiar with this topic. It's another form. So you can combine, just remember, these are examples. So then you can combine, or you don't have to copy exactly as you have here. If you don't want to use, I'm sorry, or I'm afraid, don't use it. It's not, the important thing is the expression like, I'm not familiar with this. I never thought about this. I am not really familiar with this topic, but I would say that. So as you have here, then try to give your best answer. It's because sometimes, remember, you have two situations. Sometimes you don't know anything about the topic. So you use expression. You can use two expressions, for example, like, I'm sorry, but I never thought about this before, and I'm afraid I'm not very interested in this topic. And you stop. But in some cases, or in most of the cases, you don't know how to start your answer, but you are familiar with the question. It's not a difficult question. For example, do you feel that that video games are good or bad? Imagine we're talking about kids and technology and video games. And I ask you this question, in your opinion, do you feel that technology, that video games is good or bad for children? Well, if I want to use this situation, just I need to remember that I have two situations. If I don't want to say anything, or maybe I want to say something, but I'm not sure how to, right? So I can answer, well, I'm afraid I'm not very keen on video games and this type of technology. And for that reason, I am not very familiar with this topic. I never thought about this before. So I use three expressions. So to make it clear that I'm not going to say anything because I don't have information, I don't want to participate, I don't want to talk. But I'm saying this just in order to sound more polite and more professional. Just imagine, it's not the same if I say, no, I don't know. No, I don't want to give my answer because I don't know. It's not the same. It's 100% different. Like if I say, well, I'm so sorry, but I never thought about this before and I'm not really familiar with this topic and whatever. So for that reason, I don't have an opinion. So I can combine, and the more combinations I do, the more polite you will sound. Or you have another situation that it's maybe the question is difficult because it could be a difficult question, right? But you want to say something. So what you can do is use one of these situations, use one of these expressions just for buying time, right? For example, in your opinion, video games are good or bad for children? Well, I haven't really thought about this. I'm not really familiar with this topic, but in my opinion, I believe that video games don't have a bad influence on children because personally, I think that it's not about the game. It's more about the time that the kids spend in front of the screen. So, and in addition to this, I feel that video games nowadays are whatever. And finally, in my view, and then you can notice that the more ideas I have, the more expressions and the more connectors I'm going to be able to use. But we have a problem here that just remember, be careful with the amount of ideas you're going to mention or the way you're going to express your ideas. If you're not very familiar with this topic, or if this is the first time you're trying to use these expressions, try to use simple ideas at the beginning. And then the more you practice, the more difficult ideas or the more complex statements you're going to be able to use. If you use complicated ideas at the beginning, you're going to get lost and you're going to forget about using connectors, for example. I was forgetting about using connectors, actually. So it's something very common that happens, okay? But this is it, okay? This is this activity about. Just remember, in conclusion, we have two situations. When we want to express our personal opinion about something, we have these expressions. And we have another situation that it's when we're not sure, that we have two situations as well. If I really have nothing to say, or I want to say something, but I don't know how to start because it's a difficult topic. Just important reminders. There are no good or bad opinions. The examiner or the interviewer evaluates your communication abilities, not your viewpoint. Of course, that if you're like using bad words or just like using incorrect terms or whatever, or being rude, for example, well, it could be dangerous, right? But there are no good or bad opinions. I mean, actually, if you don't use these expressions, you're going to sound like you're forcing the other person to think or to take your idea. And maybe the other person, doesn't agree with you, right? Like, well, maybe the other person may have a totally different point of view, another opinion. So if you use these expressions, you're going to be able to have a debate, or you're going to be able to discuss about this topic, right? Imagine, I don't know, we're talking about politicians, right? That it's a very common topic nowadays. And sometimes we have arguments when we're talking about governments or politicians. So it's important to use these expressions. Of course, that it would depend on the person, but in my opinion, it's really important to use these expressions if you want to debate or participate in a discussion politely, right? So just remember, there are no good or bad opinions. And this is about your communication ability, not about your viewpoints or point of views. So always try to attempt to give you an opinion when possible. If you're not sure, if you don't have an opinion, you don't want to participate, you don't have an opinion, or you don't have information about the topic, you can use lack of opinion, right? But just use lack of opinion when you don't have anything to say as a last resort, right? Just always try to mention something. This is where you have to practice if you want to practice. And explain, for example, cultural differences if relevant. For example, I don't know, I want to use a lack of opinion because we're talking about food that I don't have in my country. Well, I can explain. I ask you a question. Okay, have you ever tried this dish before? Well, I'm not very familiar with these. I never thought about these before because we don't have this tradition in my country. We have never eaten this food before, this meal. So I'm just justifying or giving you a reason why I'm not going to participate in this discussion because I don't know about this meal. I don't know about this food. Just an example. So here we have some practice questions, and we have situations for you to see in which situations you can apply not only the connectors, but also these expressions. Education and career, for example. How school type affect career success? Of course, that the questions are more difficult and you need to think and be more creative. But just remember, use simple ideas if you are not sure, because now you have two situations, opinions and lack of opinions. We have another question here. Why do some parents choose home education? Well, that is a very interesting question. I never thought about that. I know that it exists homeschooling, but I never thought about that situation that parents choose homeschooling. Well, for example, this situation, I'm not sure if I can participate or give my opinion. Maybe I have an opinion. It's not incorrect. Maybe it's wrong or it's right, but it's not about good or bad answers. It's about my point of view. If I want to participate, I can answer this question because now I have the tools, I have the resources to organize myself. Like, well, in my opinion, some parents choose home education because, well, first of all, sometimes I imagine that they don't have money for example, they don't have money for paying a private education, in addition to this, a home system, the educational system would be affected by whatever. So I can come up with different ideas, and of course, be careful with the ideas. If I'm delving into a difficult idea to develop, that could be another problem. So use simple ideas and use the resources of these webinars. Or we have one more question, like how important are role models? People you follow, like your parents. Why are these people important to follow? Role models. Well, there is another question. We have another situation that it's culture and society. For example, what art is most interesting? Well, I'm not very familiar with art. I'm not very keen on art. I don't have a lot of information. So I never thought about this question before. I'm not very familiar with art nowadays. So I don't have an opinion about this. I'm just answering the question politely, right? Do people prefer books or films in your country? Well, that's a difficult question because it's a general question, right? So focus on your ideas from your perspective. You can think about yourself. Don't think in general, because if you think in general, you're not going to be able to use your creativity. You can talk about like, well, nowadays, because of the technology, people are like using more devices such as different platforms, the differences of ages, different generations, right? We have a lot of ideas. And one more, we have, why do people watch television serials? That is another question. Then we have more practice topics for you to see that we have several topics for applying these type of expressions. Lifestyle, for example, have shopping habits changed recently? Well, in my opinion, I believe that it has changed recently, or no, I'm not pretty sure. I never thought about this. I'm not very familiar with shopping habits, so I don't have an opinion on this. I stopped because I don't have information or I don't want to talk. Why do many young girls want to become models? That is a difficult question. And to be honest, I never thought about that before, about why young girls want to become models. So, because I'm not familiar with this topic, I don't want to answer, so I skip the question politely. Or do you think all successful people are happy? That is another difficult question. So I choose if I want to answer or not with the expressions. And we have another one, number 2, environment and infrastructure. Is water pollution a problem in Brazil, for example? Well, it's your opinion because maybe the other person believes or thinks in a different way. Like I can say, well, in my opinion, yeah, there is a water pollution problem in Brazil, or no, from my perspective, or in my opinion, there isn't a water pollution problem in Brazil, for example. And we can debate, we can share and exchange our personal opinions on this matter. We have another question. Will transport system improve in your country? That is another one. And what's better, public or private transport? That is another difficult question, but remember, you choose if you want to answer, because now you have elements for defending yourself, okay? Yourselves. So here we have more practice. The way you can practice, it's working in pairs, taking turns, selecting questions from the list. Now that you have this file, you can practice. Answer using opinions, expressions, and remember, try to use connectors if you wanna develop your ideas, if you wanna structure the sequence. If you can't answer, express lack of opinions. I'm not familiar with these. I never thought about these before, okay? Okay, guys, so far so good. This is the class about, this is a webinar about, of course, that the most important thing is practicing and trying to use simple ideas. If you don't feel comfortable enough, try to start with simple ideas, and then you can move on to more complex scenarios and as well as complex ideas, right? But you can start with simple things. Just for you can separate, for that reason, I separate the activities into 2. Because you start with the connectors, you practice with that, and then you move on to personal opinions or lack of opinions, and you practice. Then the final practice, it would be joining both of the activities and coming up with more complex ideas or statements. So guys, I hope you really enjoyed this webinar. Just remember, the more you practice, the better. And if you want to have classes with me, I recommend it because you will learn 100%, okay? I really appreciate you for being here.